chart, the hierarchy chart of the Secretary of State's office, it doesn't say Assistant Secretary of State or Chris Nance. In fact, he's got a title that doesn't exist anywhere else in the Ohio government, which is, if you look under his name, it says go-to guy. So he is kind of the Secretary of State's go-to guy. But while he likes to take all the credit of being the go-to guy, he can't do that except for the workers that really work very hard for him. And there are three of them that are here today that have really are invaluable assistants to the Secretary of State's office and also to our office because they're here day in and day out. Gladys Harrison, if you just kind of raise your hand or stand up. And Ed Monroe. And Tyrone, we introduced before. And I understand that there's Kelly Pinkerton here as well, who I've not had the pleasure of working for, but it's good to see you. So, with no further ado, Chris Nance. Thanks, Chris.
Sandy, thank you for inviting us to join you at the forum today. We appreciate the chance to share a couple of words. I also want to introduce one of our newest administrative support team members, Omar El-Haj Musa, who started with us a couple of weeks ago. And again, welcome. I also wanted to thank a number of people who've been involved in the transition here in Cuyahoga County since the beginning of Jennifer Bruner's administration. Obviously, there are two items that Sandy and Rob Frost asked me to share a few thoughts on, and that is both on the administrative oversight role of the Secretary of State's office, as well as a little bit of background on the upcoming review of the voting equipment. But even before I get to that, we of course had a number of community involvements in the Cuyahoga board over the last number of months. We had a search committee that was very actively involved and engaged. In fact, Rob Frost was a part of that search committee, along with 5 or 6 others throughout the community, both for the director and for the deputy director. Spent a lot of time, spent a lot of hours, and I know that we have a lot of friends and family here this afternoon, but I think that the search committee, and I happen to be a part of that. I'm not trying to compliment myself, but I think the Republicans and the Democrats alike, came to consensus agreement and recommendation that our two individuals to serve as director and as deputy director, we're absolutely thrilled with their selection and with their leadership. And I know that you would all describe the work of Pat McDonald and James Black as being outstanding work, that they are committed professionals, and that it is a breath of fresh air. I don't mind saying that. Now, in terms of what I've been asked to do, I've learned a number of years ago that when you're asked to do something, say what you need to say, and sit down. So, as it relates to administrative oversight, I'll touch on that first. The subsequent to the secretary asking for and receiving ultimately the resignations of all of the previous members of the Cuyahoga board. As a part of that process, we of course all know that the administrative oversight option, which is available to the Secretary of State as a part of his or her statutory responsibilities or options, if you will, was in fact put into place and was exercised here in Cuyahoga County. And since that time, since the early part of this year, the Cuyahoga board, having been under administrative oversight. If I had to perhaps describe a few key words that then lead into just a few additional thoughts and examples, I would use these 3 words: access, troubleshooting, and strategy. Access, troubleshooting, and strategy. As it relates to access, as both Sandy McNair and Rob Frost can attest, the Secretary and I have a conference call with the 2 of them, a Democratic member, a Republican member, along with the Director and the Deputy Director. Those calls are now, scheduled and are taking place on a weekly basis. What that does is that gives us an opportunity to stay in touch on issues, stay in close touch on issues, and that we believe is a very important part of our responsibility. We all have each other's cell phone numbers. I have to make sure Pat has a couple more numbers before I leave today. But just really not to overstate that, but in terms of just ready access, that's very important. And again, a number of you know that before assuming my duties in the Secretary of State's office, I had some responsibilities as the Deputy Director for Congresswoman Tubbs Jones, and I used to spend a lot of time here at the Board of Elections. And what I know is that it's important to be able to, have access to the people that you need to get answers from. And I also know that in my capacity as a staff member or even a member of Congress, how difficult it was to get information, from the Secretary of State's office. Now, it's important to not overstate that because, when you have such a significant change in terms of approach and style, that we are certainly doing our best to be responsive. And at the same time, we think that we've begun to set out some very important standards, if you will, in terms of access. And so that's a key word. And that not only goes to the access of these board members and the director and deputy director to the secretary and to me, but also to key members of the Secretary of State staff throughout. Obviously, elections are about staying on top of issues. So there are administrative issues and there are legal issues. And again, both Pat and Jane know that they have complete access to the legal team, at the Secretary of State's office. Gretchen Quinn is the specific attorney. Each of our attorneys are assigned a different part of the state, and Gretchen Quinn has that responsibility here in Cuyahoga County. But in terms of consultation, the election attorneys are available to each respective board of elections. But again, that stepped up level of access is certainly available and in place. In terms of the election staff, really there are so many examples, but I'll cite 3 or 4, and certainly if there are some questions and answers, I'm sure that Jane and I can come up with a long list. Problems with servers. We've had a few problems with servers. And here in the Cuyahoga board, and so there's been a need for backup servers. That sounds like a relatively simple thing. But one of the things that you learn about elections is that there is process, and there is procedure, and there is protocol. So when Jane identifies a problem, she calls me, and it lights up. I actually have her name in my phone. It lights up like Batman when she calls me, and I know that we have something that needs to be resolved. And so we have the issue of servers needed to move a server, a backup server from the Secretary of State's office, here to Cleveland. It has to be properly configured. I think that's happened now on a couple of occasions when there were some issues with even formatting the ballot. The servers needing to be relocated from here over to where the ballots were printed. And this was a particular issue that I think cropped up on late Friday afternoon or Saturday morning. And Tyrone Howard, our IT field staff representative, and I were on the phone, and then James on the phone, and then down in Columbus. Again, not to spend too much time on that specific example, but whether it's in the evening or on the weekends, there's a very close working relationship. The fact that there were, and Jane knows this obviously even better than I do, but there were, how many elections? There were seven elections in 45 days. Is that right, Jane? Seven elections, and see, I have to remember. It's part of our role, administrative oversight. Seven elections in 45 days. And what does that mean? That means that in terms of compliance, and in terms of staying on top of, how the responsibilities and regulations, it just means that there are a lot of bouncing balls. And so the opportunity for Jane and Pat to collaborate with either our elections director, Dave Farrell, Pat Wolf, who also has been involved in elections with the Secretary of State's office for 20 years, or again, it's connecting and working with the legal staff. With that number of elections, there's been many opportunities to stay in close touch. So access, troubleshooting, and then in terms of strategy, again, with going back to the 7 elections in 45 days, if there is a specific approach that might shave off a few steps, that's certainly the kind of recommendations that I've heard coming out of our election staff, back here to the county. And also in terms of, obviously, this will be a good segue to a few points I wanted to make about the upcoming voting review. But in terms of, what to do, with the voting equipment. Obviously, for any of you in the room that are parents, throwing out the baby with the bathwater is not an acceptable option. You have to be able to do things. We're in a situation where we know we may have to drain the bathtub while we hold the baby, turn the water back on and fill back up the tub, and continue to wash the baby. So I know that that's a pretty basic analogy, but that's really what we're faced with when it comes to some of the issues leading up to the review of the e-voting systems. Let me just say a few words about that. And then certainly Sandy and Rob, if there are questions, I'll be happy to take them here or to take them from my seat. Many of you know that we're in the process of advancing a recommendation to the controlling board. Secretary Brunner advanced an application, if you will, to the controlling board for the approval of a test plan here in the state of Ohio for the voting equipment and the voting tabulation systems here in the state of Ohio. There really are two basic pieces to this upcoming review and testing. The initial phase or component of the testing was constructed as a result of a request for proposals. I'm sure, again, some of you being closely watching this as it unfolded. The RFP process started in June, and as a result of that process, there were 5 what we would describe industrial responses, industrial companies or firms that responded to that RFP. We reviewed, and the Secretary reviewed those responses, and ultimately identified 2 of those industrial respondents as prospective participants pending controlling board approval, both SysTest and Microsolve. And at the same time, as we reviewed the independent evaluation ability, capability of the industrial reviewers, we certainly are underscoring their participation in the process as being important. And at the same time, we have chosen to, and the Secretary has reached out to and now has engaged several academic institutions as well. I think many of you know that we have one Ohio institution. We did approach Ohio State, and they did not indicate that they had the requisite expertise in the field of computer science to specifically tackle this study. The three organizations, academic institutions, the Pennsylvania State University, headed by Patrick McDaniel, computer scientist there, is our principal investigator, the University of Pennsylvania, and an entity described as WebWise, which is affiliated with the University of California, Santa Barbara, and of course our own Cleveland State University, focusing on a piece of the study as well. Why don't I briefly underscore what each of them are doing. Cleveland State's focused on the documentation. Pennsylvania's Penn State University will be focused on some red team penetration testing of both the Premier and the HART system. The University of Pennsylvania will be focused on the source code review and testing of the ESNS systems, and the WebWise / the UC Santa Barbara team will also be focused on the ESNS systems, focused on the red team and the penetration testing. Now, some might ask, why have both industrial and academic reviewers? And one of the terms that I was actually introduced to by one of the folks in this room was the concept of parallel testing. And the concept of parallel testing is as exactly as you would assume by the title or the word, to have parallel but independent testing done by both industrial and academic reviewers. I think it's fair to say that there could be critique delivered about both groups. There are some that would describe the industrial testers as being perhaps a bit, too corporate in preference or in the pursuit of the work that they do, and some might describe, the academic folks as perhaps being too freewheeling. It's important to know that there is a very specific scope of work for each of the entities, each of the review teams involved in the study, for SysTest Microsoft, and for each of the academic teams, that there are project managers associated with, or individuals responsible for project management at the level of in each of those organizations. We have also engaged the Patel Memorial Institute to serve as the overall project manager, and that individual's responsibility is to keep track of the many details we meet on a daily basis to review where we are and to make sure that we continue to accomplish each of the milestones associated, with the project. Let me just say a couple more things in terms of where is this all headed? Where is this all headed? I know that Sandy, you had a conversation before I arrived on perhaps some of the feedback or some of the observations vis-a-vis the California study. And as many of you know, one of the actions that was ultimately taken by Secretary Bowen, Deborah Bowen, subsequent to the review in California, is that she made the decision to decertify both the Premier and the HART equipment, and then recertify the equipment for the use of handicapped voters, and is continuing to look at recertification of vendor equipment, pending certain issues being mitigated, by the vendors. The process in Ohio will be a little bit different, and the review process, and also the overall process. First of all, Secretary Bruner has been involved in conversations with legislative leaders for a number of weeks now, including both the President of the Senate, Harris, and the Speaker of the House, Jeff Husted, and their respective staff teams. Knowing that here in Ohio we also have this process called the controlling board, which is the entity that ultimately approves the HALA dollars that are already allocated to the Secretary of State's office. Just to be clear, these are dollars that are already essentially under the control of the Secretary of State's office. But because of the fiscal controls that they appropriately have in place, it's still a part of the process to go to the controlling board to actually receive the approval to advance the project. And so, as opposed to California, that is now in the process of engaging the legislators on the back end of the process, here in Ohio, obviously that engagement is happening on the front end. Obviously there's a few bumps, but we believe, and the Secretary strongly believes, and has conveyed, and I've been involved in each of these conversations, that it's critical that if there are issues that need to be resolved and mitigated, that those are best done in a bipartisan way. Because we have asserted and we have been told by Republican and Democratic legislative leaders alike that everyone understands the value of the vote and the value of having each vote counted. And so they are certainly continuing to raise questions about the approach and making sure that there are appropriate safeguards. I'll mention two other differences between the Ohio and California review, and then again take my seat for any questions. During the course of the review, Secretary Bruner has now, as recently as this morning, met with the Election Officials Association, the head of that association, and there will be a group of 12 election officials involved in getting regular updates on the review of the voting equipment during the course of the review. There will also be a smaller subset of those same individuals who will be invited to view the facilities where the testing will be taking place and also receive kind of the next level of information as the review goes forward. One of the items that we're intimately involved in working with boards, the equipment that's being tested is actually equipment that's coming from the field. We didn't simply ask the vendors for equipment and test that equipment. We had a commitment from the vendors to essentially loan us equipment, and then we're swapping that equipment with equipment that's actually being used in the field. So there's a lot of coordination and a lot of logistics around executing that part of the plan. And so the involvement of election officials is very important. And then finally, of that 12-member team of election officials, 4 of them will be involved in actually reviewing all of the reports that come out of each of the project teams. And they'll be reviewing those reports along with the secretary. And then the recommendations will then be made to the governor and the legislature for any potential mitigations to the election equipment. So it is a process that has been long in the making. It has been a challenge, I think, to construct a review that we believe is the most balanced and the most comprehensive review. There have been a number of good studies done in a number of other states, from California to Maryland, to Florida to Connecticut. We believe, however, that the litany of e-voting issues that have been accumulated here in the state of Ohio, certainly here in Cuyahoga County, require and mandate that Secretary Bruner conduct a full and complete review within the context of the state of Ohio, and then provide our best recommendations to the legislative leaders that ultimately will have to be involved in helping to resolve any potential litigations. So with that said, I'll stop.